Hi guys, James at Rampant Lion Reviews again for you today with another beer review. For this one, we are going to cross the Øresund once again, and we're going to go back to Copenhagen in Denmark, one of my favourite places in the world, one of the best beer cities in the world these days in my opinion as well, and we're going to return to a brewery that has featured on the channel many times before. I've had lots of beers from these guys over the years, many different styles, and I would say it's fair to call this brewery one of the best known Danish craft beer brands these days. So if you haven't checked them out already, I highly recommend that you do. But the beer we're going to have a look at today comes from a style bracket that I've really enjoyed from these guys over the last little while, so fingers crossed it's another good one. Hopefully it's an interesting review, and I hope that you guys enjoy my take on this one as well. So yeah, for this one then, like I say, we're going over to Copenhagen in Denmark, and we're going to revisit Mikkeller once again. So it seems that this beer has two names. Originally it was called The Guide. It comes in at 7% ABV. It's a New England hazy, whatever you want to call it, IPA, but when it's come over here to Sweden, it's been renamed Snowstorm. Now, the reason for this will be one of the Systembolaget rules about the artwork and the names of beers and things like this. There's various rules over here that are about things being attractive to children, or portraying women in the wrong way and so on. And there's been quite a few beers over the years that have had to kind of change their name or change their artwork or something like this. So yeah, kind of an interesting thing here, but this has happened quite a few times with different breweries. I know that Aromatic from Copenhagen have been in trouble before. I know that Wizard Brewing up in Gothenburg had to change some of their artwork and things as well. But yeah, as we say anyway, this beer is The Guide, so we'll call the review that. We will call the review The Guide / Snowstorm, I guess. But just to let you see what the original artwork on this one was like, there you are. You can see people climbing up the mountain and things, and obviously, according to Systembolaget, they got stuck in a snowstorm. But there you go. As we said, 7% New England hazy IPA. Hopefully it's another good one. The last beer that we had from Mikkeller in this bracket was called the Hop Opera, but that was a double IPA, if memory serves me correctly. But yeah, fingers crossed this one is as good as that. Hopefully you guys enjoy the review, so let's get cracking. As always with my reviews then, I'll tell you a little bit about the brewery before we taste the beer. If you want to get straight to the tasting, just fast forward. All the usual links are in the video description below. That's the brewery website, the link to my other reviews that I've done from Mikkeller before, and you will no doubt see more added to that list in the near future. But there's all the usual social media down there. If you want to see more reviews, do please consider subscribing to the channel. The whole channel, of course, has a geography-based tagging system, so you can go into the homepage and search for beer based on country, city, state, county, province, prefecture, whatever it is you happen to be interested in. Do check out the playlists of beers from different countries. There is one there for all the Danish beers that I've reviewed for you. That's constantly being added to. And as always, please do get in touch and let me know some of the other beers and breweries that you guys would like to see me review. It's always great to hear from you guys that are watching the videos, and the support that you show the channel is hugely appreciated. So anyway, to tell you a little bit about Mikkeller once again then, on to my brewery notes. So Mikkeller, as I mentioned to you already, originate in Copenhagen, and they are the famous Danish gypsy brewery founded back in 2006 by Christian Keller and Mikkel Bjergso, although they're now run exclusively by Bjergso, who used to be a physics and maths teacher. Christian Keller, from what I understand, left in the early stages because he wanted to do a kind of core range of beers, but he went on to work for a magazine I think called Soundhouse in Copenhagen. But the name of the brewery is of course an amalgamation of their names. But again, these guys are very influenced by the American craft beer movement, and they basically started out as the homebrewing experimentations of Christian and Mikkel, and grew from there. But for a long time they didn't have their own brewery. They were a gypsy brewery, if you like, and they brewed at a variety of host breweries in America, Norway, Scotland and Belgium, and most of their beer for a long time was brewed at the De Proef Brouwerij in Locriste just outside of Ghent in Belgium. But their home base as such is the Mikkeller Bar on Victoriagade in Copenhagen. That is the original one, and very recently I released an out and about video that I filmed there, so do go and check that place out if you find yourself in Copenhagen. But they also have a collaboration bar with Toul called Mikkeller and Friends, which you'll find in the Nørrebro area of the city, and I do still need to go and visit that one as well. The founders of Toul were of course former students of Mikkel Bjergso, Tobias Emil Jensen and Tore Geinter. were their names. But a little bit later on, of course, over the first few years, they established their name. They started building up their output and things like that and exporting their beers all across the world. But in April of 2016, they took over AleSmith's former brewery in San Diego after they moved on to a larger space. And the following year, in 2017, they announced that they were going to establish a second brewery in Citi Field, which is the home of the New York Mets in New York City. But this closed down in October of 2020, so quite recently actually. But they've also now got a location in Copenhagen, which is called Balhavn, or Baghaven as it's kind of pronounced if you were to pronounce it English. How do you say? Through English phonetics, I guess we could say. But this is where they do a lot of their sour beers. So they've got 12 oak fodders up there that range from 3,000 to 7,000 litres, and they've got a vast variety of different barrels and things that they age these things in, of course. But the beers are brewed at Warpig's Brew Pub, which is in the Meatpacking District. That's a collaboration that they do with Three Floyds Brewing from Munster, Indiana, over in the States. But the beers are brewed down at the Warpig's Brew Pub and then transported in a tank and a trailer up to Balhavn to be aged and blended. And they've got a lab up there where they can isolate new strains to create different house yeasts. And there's also a tap room there as well, where I've also filmed an out and about video. But this has got their own beers as well as various other guest beers from different sour breweries around the world, which is pretty cool. So I would recommend that you go up to Balhavn if you get the chance. That is a really, that area it's called Refosluren, if I'm remembering the name correctly. That district of Copenhagen is really interesting. A former industrial port that's been kind of converted into a sort of hipster beer and food district, actually. Really worth checking out if you get the chance. But these days they've got various bars across the world. In Copenhagen itself, they have the two Ramen Tobiru restaurants. They have their bottle shop in Torvehalen, if I'm remembering the name of the hall rightly. And as I said, they've got their Warpig's Brew Pub, which is a collaboration with Three Floyds Brewing in Munster, Indiana, close to Chicago in the States. But they've got various bars around the world. There's ones in Barcelona, Madrid, Berlin, Warsaw, Bucharest, Stockholm, Tórshavn in the Faroe Islands, Tokyo, Seoul, Taipei, Shanghai. As I said, there's various locations in Copenhagen, also a good few in Bangkok as well. I think there's one in Singapore these days as well, actually, come to think of it. And they've also got a few different things in San Diego these days as well, which is very cool. But yeah, quite a worldwide, a brand, I guess you could say, that is recognised worldwide these days. They've done some very, very nice beers over the years, and they are definitely worth checking out if you haven't already. One of the beers I really want to review from these guys actually is Green Gold, so I'll need to keep an eye out and see if I can find that at some point soon. If you ever fly into Copenhagen Airport, there is the Mikkeller bar there that's open 24 hours. I think it's reopened again after the whole COVID-19 situation, so check that out if you get the chance. But yeah, that's all I can really tell you about Mikkeller for the moment. If you want to learn more about these guys, you can of course check out the brewery website. You can follow them on Facebook and Instagram to keep up to date with all the latest goings on. You can check out the Rate Beer, Untappd and Beer Advocate pages as well to learn more about all the different beers that these guys have done. I'm not sure how many beers they've released these days, but it's a very, very impressive number, probably close to 2,000 or something like this. But yeah, that's it for your history section. So just a little quick look at the can again. This one is a 440 milliliter can, of course. But yeah, I think this beer cost me about 50 Swedish kroner, if memory serves me correctly. So that's about €5, about £4.50 sterling, and I guess somewhere in the region of $5.50, $5.75 American. But yeah, I think this beer, it doesn't say, but I wonder if this beer, yeah, so it says here, yeah, brewed at Toil City in Svinninge in Denmark. So Svinninge is pretty much right in the middle, or well, kind of over to the west actually, of Sjælland, which is the island upon which Copenhagen sits in Denmark. So yeah, that's the big new shiny facility that Toll have, of course, as well. But yeah, 7% New England IPA. As I said, this beer, known originally as the Guide, but they changed the name to Snowstorm in Sweden for some reason. Either that or they're just joking that they had to block out the can. I'm not 100% sure, but this one is hopped with Citra, Simcoe and Mosaic from what I understand. So a kind of classic hop lineup in this one. Let's get it out then and we will get on with the tasting. Very much looking forward to this one, and hopefully it's another good beer. So there we are. That looks very nice, I have to say. So I'll just give you another quick look at the artwork if you've joined the review midway through. That is the original artwork that was on the this beer before Systembolaget went kind of crazy and said you're not allowed that. I don't know what would be wrong with this according to the Systembolaget rules, but that's just how it goes sometimes. But yeah, as you can see then, now that we've poured this beer, it's poured a lovely kind of bright yellow colour. This one, I would describe this colour as being very akin to a mango juice. As I've told you in previous reviews, I like comparing the New England IPAs to different fruit juices because this is what their appearance really reminds me of. You could see that the beer poured with about a half finger of a frothy, I would say perfect white head. That's faded away to be a nice kind of thin foamy layer, and it's leaving a nice kind of ring around the edge of the glass. But yeah, one or two big bubbles sticking towards the side of the glass, a few little ones going up towards the bottom of that head there, and the head incidentally has faded away to be a very nice thin kind of foamy layer. But yeah, like I said to you, colour in this one, lovely bright kind of mango juice yellow colour. The colour in your beer, of course, is dependent on 1, the type of malts that you use. This determines the magnitude of the colour. 2, the length of your wort boil. The longer you boil the wort, the more the sugars caramelise, thus you get a darker colour of beer. And 3 and 4, adjuncts and barrel aging will of course play a role in deciding the colour of your beer as well. But yeah, this one is fairly standard for a New England IPA, nothing surprising about it. The level of haze for a 7%er is fairly decent as well. It's not the soupiest and gloopiest one that I've come across right enough, but it's certainly leaning towards that part of the the soupier and gloopier end of the spectrum, I guess we could say. But the level of haze that you get in these beers depends on 1, the type of malts that you use, and 2, sorry, not the type of malts that you use, it depends on the wheat and the oat content. So yeah, theoretically speaking, as you go up the alcohol scale, you should get you should get more oat and wheat in your beer, but it depends on, it varies from brewery to brewery, of course. So yeah, it just depends how much wheat and oat things. So you can get triple IPAs that are New England IPAs that are not as hazy as this one and things like that. It just, as I say, varies from brewery to brewery. Wheat and oat content mainly, varies from recipe to recipe, and the yeast will play a role in there as well. I keep having brain farts when I'm filming reviews these days. Tapeworm in my brain or something like this, who knows. But yeah, as we said, in terms of a New England IPA, nothing particularly surprising about this beer in terms of its appearance. Let's have a quick look at the aroma and just see how we get on with this one then. Yeah, it smells pretty much as you would expect. It smells a wee bit boozier actually, and a wee bit more kind of brown sugary compared to some of the other ones that we've had from Mikkeller before. But as I say, I've not had too many New England IPAs from these guys, come to think of it. It's a style that I do need to explore a little bit more from Mikkeller, but I guess when they're brewing a good number of beers at the Toul facility now, we're probably going to see a good few more of these, because Toul are brewing loads and loads of New England IPAs, of course, pardon me. But yeah, I will say the aroma of this one is pretty nice, and it comes across as very, very familiar, of course, when it's Citra Simcoe Mosaic in this beer. That's not surprising. This is an age-old combination. But yeah, aroma of this beer, I'm going to say straight away, gets a big thumbs up from me. So yeah, the other thing I forgot to mention was that this beer was released on the 25th of May as part of the Tillfällig assortment through Systembolaget here in Sweden. Forgot to say that earlier. But anyway, aroma. So this beer, there's nothing surprising about it, but the aroma is very, very nice. Straight away with this one, you can smell that white bready backbone to the beer, and it's lovely. There is a little bit of wheaty bitiness there at the back of the nose, which is great. But the white bread in this one comes across as being quite crisp and fresh, but at the same time it's got a little bit of thickness to it. But yeah, lovely big wheaty bitey notes at the back of the nose there. You do get a bit of oatiness out of this beer as well, for sure. You can smell the oats kind of thickening up in this one. So I think this beer might have been sitting for a couple of weeks before it came across to Sweden. I think I've had this one in my fridge actually for about 2 weeks. So I've kind of added to that before I film it, but I've got so much beer in the fridge these days, it's just, it's quite hard to get around to reviewing everything sort of within good time, if you like. So give us a break with that one, but people don't, yeah, well, I say give us a break, people don't really complain. But yeah, you can smell with this beer, you get a thing with New England IPAs, they sort of thicken up a little bit, and you can get wee hints from the aroma. The wheat changes a little bit, the oats kind of thicken up and things, and the beer almost just smells a little bit almost clumpy or chunky or something. You can get a little bit of that out of this beer. That happens after a few weeks in a New England IPA, in my opinion, but it doesn't really affect the flavour all that much, I would say. But you do notice it in the aroma for sure. But yeah, as I say, white bready base with this one. There's a few bread crusty elements in there, a nice big wheaty bite, you know, big oaty kind of creaminess. And for me, this beer actually does have a fair wee bit of a kind of brown sugary element to it. There's a nice bit of a kind of butter candy coming out of this one, you know, Werther's original butterscotchy, butter candy kind of elements in there. And I have noticed this, there are some breweries putting a little more elements of kind of brown sugar in their beers, you know, like a little bit of Carahel or you know, something like this, Cara Munich and stuff like that. And I think it adds a nice touch. To put a little bit of brown sugar in these New England IPAs is always good, especially when you start to get towards the higher end of the alcohol scale. This is a 7%er though, so it's not too high in terms of alcohol, but I certainly get a good little bit of a kind of brown sugary element out of this one, which I think works very, very nicely. But other than that, I don't think there's too much to say about the malt base in this one. One of the more brown sugary leaning ones I think I've had in recent times in terms of the New England IPA style bracket, but it works. It does work very, very nicely. So yeah, in terms of the hoppy side of things then, and that's what we should be focusing on when it's an IPA. Again, it's what you'd expect. I know these three hops pretty well. So yeah, Citra, Simcoe and Mosaic, all American hops. Simcoe's about 12 to 13% alpha acid. Citra and Citra and Mosaic are both 14%. Simcoe's going to give you that lovely soft, smooth passion fruit. Citra's going to give you a big mango note and a good bit of citrus, and Mosaic is going to give you that big juicy tangerine. And you can smell all of these things in this beer, of course. But on the green side of things, you do get you get a nice little bit of earthiness in the back of the nose, and that's the Mosaic that's going to give you that. There's a big green floral aromaticity to this one. I wouldn't describe it as spicy, but it's got a lovely, just big aromatic quality to it, and I certainly like how that goes together in this beer as well. So yeah, lovely, big, juicy, fruity components to this one, just kind of backing that up. It's got a big oily fruity character, but it's also got a nice kind of fresh grassy element to it as well. I would say the green component in this beer really leans towards the grassy end of I'd say it's what would we say actually? It's got a really kind of strong freshly cut grass aroma to it, this one. There's a bit of floral character in there as well. But yeah, I would say that it leans more towards that kind of floral, grassy end of the spectrum in terms of the green component. But I think it's very fresh and grassy in the beginning, but then you start to get more of the floral notes pushing their way out behind that. So I like that about this beer, for sure. Green component works out very, very nicely, definitely. But in terms of the fruity, in terms of the fruity, juicy side of this beer, I'm going to say that overall the fruity characters in this beer come across as being very, very oily, and that's interesting. I do get a lot of orange out of this one, for sure. So the Mosaic for me shines out quite a lot in this one. I do wonder if that's because of the slightly more brown sugary backbone that the beer has. But yeah, Mosaic comes out of this beer straight away. That's the Mosaic would be the first one I would recognise out of this. This beer's got a lovely big orangey component to it, and it doesn't come across so much as a light tangerine initially, like you would normally expect from Mosaic, but it's certainly got that big oily kind of more Amarillo type orange sitting underneath this one. It doesn't quite have the same zest that you would get from Amarillo, right enough, but you get the lighter tangerine notes sitting on top of that. You definitely pick up a bit of that slightly stronger passion fruit, which is going to come both from Simcoe. Simcoe's going to give you the softer passion fruit, whereas Citra will give you a wee bit more of a kind of stronger passion fruit, and you can smell the big mango qualities there as well. And I think the mango is kind of adding to the sort of oiliness of the tropical side of the beer, but definitely a wee bit of a kind of lemony zesty quality to this one, and I think that's going to come from the Citra, of course, as well. But the aroma of this beer, I think, is very nice. It ticks a lot of boxes for me in terms of the New England IPA bracket, if you like, and it's an age-old hop blend, this one. We know this combination fairly well from all the reviews we've done on the channel. But yeah, take a bit of time to ponder over the aroma of the beer before you get stuck into it, although I think it is about time that we get cracking with this beer. So yeah, this one is the Guide, a 7% New England Hazy IPA from Mikkeller, the famous Danish gypsy brewery from Copenhagen over in Denmark. Let's get stuck into this one. Slange, skål, and cheers. Yeah, that's pretty solid actually. It does taste like quite a few of the Toil beers that I've had already though. There's something with a lot of these Toil beers that you get, they've got a little bit of almost like chalkiness to the mouthfeel. It's like they've got this sort of oat, it's like the oats and the bread mixed in a certain way, and it kind of gives you a wee bit of chalkiness, and you get that straight away out of this beer. So you can't, like, I've noticed that in a few of the Toil beers in recent times, it gives you that sort of chalky mouthfeel in a sense, and I don't know if that's to do with the age of these beers that we're getting them over here in Sweden. As I say, I think they sit for a week or two in a warehouse or something like that before they get distributed around Sweden, which it's just a logistics issue that. But yeah, you can definitely taste in this particular Mikkeller one, you can definitely taste a little bit of that as I say, that sort of kind of chalkiness in the mouthfeel that you notice with some of the Toil beers as well. But once you get round that, of course, the flavour, once you get over the initial sip of this beer, the beer sort of mellows out and kind of rounds off a little bit. So yeah, it's a pretty solid, straight shooting New England IPA, this one. It's not quite as sweet and brown sugary as the Aroma was leading me to believe, but it works. It does work very nicely in that sense, for sure. So, on the, as we would say, on the malty side of things, then we'll start off and go through the beer as we usually do. Straight away then, across the middle third of your palate, you can feel a sort of smooth bready base to this beer. That goes right across the middle of your palate. Sitting on top of that too, you can feel the sort of smoothness of the wheat. So you've got a bready layer, you've got a wheaty layer, and then you can feel the oats kind of sitting on top of this. And this blankets both the middle third of your palate and the back third of your palate. So yeah, it's kind of interesting in that sense. But on the middle third of your palate, sitting on top of that, at either end of the middle third of your palate, you will get a wee bit more of a kind of bread crusty element coming out of the beer. In the very centre of your palate though, you can feel there's a little bit of a kind of circle, there's a little bit of a circle in the middle of your tongue, and you can feel that there's some sort of there's a little bit of a kind of butterscotchy, butter candy type thing coming out of the beer, for sure. And I do like how that side of things goes together, definitely. But it does lean a little bit more towards the brown sugary side of things, but not as much as the Aroma would lead you to believe. But yeah, in the dead centre of your palate, nice kind of smooth butter candy, butterscotchy type thing. So I do like how that goes together. There's one or two little biscuity elements in the beer, and I do wonder as well, if you go to the dead centre of your palate and then move back, you can feel there's a little bit of an almost Pilsner malty dryness develops as you go towards the back of that middle third of your palate. So yeah, this beer, it rounds off quite nicely, but as I say, I think this one might have been, I've had it for 2 weeks, so I'm partially to blame, but I think this one might have been sitting for a wee bit before it's been released through Systembolaget, of course. But yeah, fairly solid and straight shooting New England IPA, this one. Is it as good as the Hop Opera? I don't think it's quite as good as that. It doesn't feel quite as fresh as that, actually, and I've got a feeling that with the Hop Opera, I think these two beers might have been sent over at the same time, and this one has just sat for a little bit longer. I've got a feeling that might be what's happened, to be honest. But yeah, in terms of the back third of your palate then, so in that border region between middle third and back third of your palate, you get a little bit of a kind of bready, kind of yeasty build up in there, a wee bit of bread crust sitting in, but then on the back third of your palate, on top of that bread, wheat, oat kind of base layer that I talked about, towards the back, of course, you get a little bit more wheaty bitiness, but sitting on top of that back third of the palate, you can feel the kind of yeasty qualities of the beer, that little more airy, yeasty kind of thing. So as you start from the back of the tongue, you can feel that slightly taller, more airy, yeasty quality in there. As you go further forward, it kind of As you go further forward, it kind of condenses down a little bit, so it goes like this, condenses down a wee bit, and then as you go into the middle third of your palate, the rest of this flavour is quite condensed together. But I would say overall, the malt base in this one, it leans towards a kind of thick, oaty and bready kind of thing. As I say, it gives you a wee bit of an almost kind of chalky mouthfeel, and there's a wee bit of sweetness in this. But it's a fairly standard, straight shooting New England IPA, this one. It does taste very similar to the Toil ones that we've had in the past, of course. But yeah, I think that's what happens a lot of the time with Mikkeller, is that Mikkeller draws up recipes and just tells the breweries, tells the kind of the outsourced breweries just, oh, brew this, and I think that's what they do, to be quite honest. But they've got other brewers working in there as well, of course, so they will be responsible for some of these for sure. But yeah, in terms of the hoppy side of things, then we'll move on to the hoppy part of the beer. Back corners of the palate, you've got a nice little bit of earthiness in there. That's the mosaic that's going to give you that. As you move further forward, there's a little touch of a herbal note in there. And as you push further forward towards the kind of front corners of the palate, you get a nice kind of floral, aromatic sort of thing coming out of the beer as well. So I can appreciate how that it goes together in this one. But round the front curve of the palate, there's a little bit of a lighter sort of grassy vibe to the beer. And again, I do like how this goes together. There's a little bit of a more kind of zesty, there's a little bit of a kind of grassy zestiness in there as well, which I think is most likely to come from the Citra in this one. But the green component for me, it doesn't feel too pungent. As I say, I do wonder about how long this beer has been sitting in the Systembolaget warehouse. I've criticised Systembolaget for this in the past, for how long they have these beers sitting. They've got to be a little bit more flexible in terms of their release dates and things. So yeah, I think they need to, because you know, with IPAs you really need to get these out there as fresh as you can. But when it comes to obviously that's a bit more difficult when it comes to import beers, because it's private companies that import these beers into Sweden, and Systembolaget buys them from the private companies. So there's a bit of a dual responsibility there for sure, both on the company to get them in good time, and for Systembolaget to be a bit more flexible, if you like. But yeah, that covers the green component of this beer. As I say, not at its most pungent, but I think that's down to the age of the beer. But yeah, leans nice kind of big floral green component to it, which you would expect from these hops. Remember, when it comes to New England IPAs as well, that they are relying on late edition hops rather than early edition hops. Early edition hops, of course, are more prominent in the West Coast IPAs. They give you more bitterness and so on, whereas in the New England IPAs and the late edition hops, they'll give you more flavour and aroma, and that's exactly what you get out of this beer. But yeah, on that front third of your palate, that's where you get all these nice juicy fruity esters. So in the border region between front third and middle third of your palate, again you get a little bit of a kind of build up there. There's a wee bit of a kind of bread crusty element and some nice yeasty qualities there too. But the base of that front third of your palate is quite nice as well. So you can feel that nice kind of smooth bready element in there for sure. You can feel that kind of forming underneath, and some of the oats. Then sitting on top of that, you get that oily bubble where the juicy fruity esters roll their way out of the beer. So at the back of that front third of your palate, you get a wee bit of a pungent passion fruit. That's probably a mix of the Simcoe and the Citra, in fairness. And as you go further forward, the passion fruit mellows out, and that's going to be the more Simcoe notes. And as you move towards the middle of that front third of your palate, you get more of a kind of mango quality, and that's the Citra, 100% Citra in there. But as you go into the front half of that middle third of your palate, that's when you get the more kind of slightly oily, tangerine orange note. And it's interesting because underneath it feels like there's a more oily orange, but then on top it comes across like a lighter, juicier tangerine. And as you reach the kind of front tip of the tongue, almost as you just reach the front tip of the tongue, you might get one or two little lemony, limey qualities in there as well from the Citra, definitely. So yeah, I really like how I do like how that side of the beer goes together as well. But I would say it's a lot less orangey than the Aroma would have you believe. Again, the orangey notes are just not quite as oily and pungent as the Aroma would have you believe originally. But yeah, it's a nice enough and solidly drinkable New England IPA, this. But I would say, I think I think it has been sitting a little bit too long, but at the same time, I think it is one of these things with the Toul beers. They just have this chalky mouthfeel, and I think this one is just slightly past its best. And the more I drink of it, the more I think, yeah, it is slightly past its best. It's still a drinkable beer, it is still quite nice, but I think there's something maybe with the house yeasts or whatever it is that Toul are using to make these beers that just gives them this kind of chalkiness. And I think this is a good point that we can move on to the mouthfeel of the beer. So like I said to you, this beer, it is quite smooth. It's mid-bodied, smooth carbonation, but it leans towards the oaty and bready side of things, but these things kind of combine together to give the beer a little bit of chalkiness, and I have noticed this in some of the Toul beers before. It's just, they're not quite as clean in that sense. And it's an interesting thing, because you notice this with the Swedish New England IPAs and other Danish breweries as well. You get a real there's always a thing in the Nordic beers about the cleanliness of the water. These beers, you always get that little bit of an Arctic water kind of feel to them. With Toul though, you don't get that, and this is essentially a Toul beer. So I wonder what it is at the Toul brewery that's causing that. I don't know if it's the yeast or one of the types of malts, or some kind of interaction between the yeast and one of the malts in the beer. I don't think it's the hops. I mean, it's very unlikely that it would be the hop. The only hop that you get kind of unusual things with, I think, is cashmere, and that's just based on experience. There's certain yeasts that react some of the London fog yeasts react really weirdly with cashmere and give you some really interesting things. But yeah, there's something, as I say, there's just a bit of a chalkiness in the mouthfeel of this, and I've noticed this in other Toul beers. So I need to have a go at the Toul double IPA number 5, I think it is now. So I'll have a go at that beer when it's released here in Sweden and see what we think of that. But yeah, interesting points about that. As I say, this beer feels a little bit chalky in its mouthfeel, but it's partly to do with the import company, it's partly to do with Systembolaget not getting the beer out there, or not being flexible enough, I guess you could say. So leave it at that. But yeah, malt base in this one, as I say, kind of smooth underneath, but a little bit of chalkiness develops out of it. There's a wee bit of sweetness in there. In terms of hoppy bitterness, I think this one is hoppy bitterness, I think it's about 25-30 IBUs, kind of standard, and the fruity side of this beer is quite nice and juicy. But I think on that note, I think we can round off the review there. So a nice, solid, straight shooting enough New England IPA, but I think this one's been sitting too long, either with the import company or waiting to go out into the Systembolaget stores. So import company need to get these beers in fresher, Systembolaget need to be more flexible. We've done this criticism before. But yeah, I think there is just something strange about the mouthfeel in this. It feels a little bit chalky to me, which I'm not a great fan of. But I have noticed this in other Toul beers. If you have them fresh enough, though, the hoppy, bitter qualities kind of sort of drown that out a little bit, though. I think that's probably fair to say. But yeah, I think we can leave the review there. So this one was the Guide, also known as the Snowstorm in Sweden, apparently, from Mikkeller, brewed at Toul City in Sjælland over in Denmark. Thank you again for watching my reviews. Until the next time, please like, subscribe, share, all the usual YouTube stuff. Let me know your own thoughts on this beer in the comment section below. Let me know what your favourite beers are from Mikkeller. We will no doubt return to these guys again at some point in the future. But until then, check out my other reviews, check out Mikkeller, and I'll see you guys again soon. Slàinte, skål, and cheers.